catch on the carpet. And I see an Emmy pin on your...
Yes, that represents the fact that I served as a 2-term governor at the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. And I'm also a member of the International Language Committee.
At 3 a.m. on May 27th, Hollywood lost a warrior. Peter Kwong, the man who brought supernatural thunder to our screens as Rain in Big Trouble in Little China, closed his eyes for the final time. But this isn't just another celebrity death story. This is about a man who spent 5 decades fighting for something far more important than any movie role. Have you ever wondered what it takes to change an entire industry? What price does one person pay to open doors for thousands of others? Hold on tight, because what I'm about to reveal about Peter Kwong's secret mission will blow your mind and make you question everything you think you know about Hollywood. Picture this. It's 1973. A young martial artist, fresh off the boat from Hong Kong, walks into his first Hollywood casting room. The walls are covered with headshots of blonde-haired, blue-eyed actors. There's not a single Asian face among hundreds of photos. As Peter enters, the casting director doesn't even look up from his paperwork before saying, "Asian guy? You're here for the silent assassin role, right?" Can you imagine that moment? Your very first audition, and they've already decided who you are before you've said a single word. But here's what makes this story incredible. Instead of walking out, instead of accepting defeat, Peter did something that would change Hollywood forever. He looked that casting director straight in the eye and said, "Actually, I'm here to audition for the lead role." The room went silent. The casting director finally looked up, his eyebrows raised in what could only be described as shocked amusement. "The lead? Kid, do you know what show this is for?" It was Wonder Woman. And no, they weren't looking for an Asian love interest or sidekick. Peter was auditioning for Steve Trevor, the classic American hero role that was always given to white actors. What happened next will give you chills. Peter didn't back down. He performed a monologue he had memorized, not from the script they'd given him, but from Shakespeare's Henry V. For 3 minutes, this young martial artist transformed that sterile casting room into a battlefield, delivering one of the most powerful speeches in English literature with such conviction that even the jaded Hollywood executives stopped their side conversations to listen. Did he get the Steve Trevor role? Of course not. But something more important happened that day. The casting director, a man named Robert Sherman, was so impressed that he called Peter back the next week for a different role. A small part, as a dignified military officer who happened to be Asian. It was Peter's first professional acting credit, and it came because he refused to accept the limitations others placed on him. But here's the part that will break your heart, and nobody talks about this. After that first small victory, Peter went home to his tiny apartment in Chinatown and cried. Not from joy, but from exhaustion. Do you know how emotionally draining it is to fight for basic human dignity every single day? To walk into room after room where people see your face and immediately assume you're there to play the villain, the comic relief, or the mysterious foreigner who speaks in riddles. Peter's neighbor, an elderly Chinese woman named Mrs. Chen, heard him through the thin walls. She knocked on his door with a cup of tea and sat with him for hours that night. Years later, Peter would credit that conversation as the moment he realized his struggle wasn't just about his own career. It was about every Asian kid who would grow up watching American television, desperately searching for someone who looked like them playing the hero instead of the villain. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been the only person who looks like you in a room full of strangers? Have you ever felt the weight of representing your entire culture, knowing that if you fail, it might close doors for everyone who comes after you? That's exactly what Peter carried with him to every audition, every callback, every small role he booked throughout the 1970s, every small role on Wonder Woman, every brief appearance on Little House on the Prairie, every line he delivered on Dynasty. Peter was quietly breaking barriers that had stood for generations. But here's what most people don't realize. He was developing a strategy. While other actors focused solely on landing bigger roles, Peter was playing a different game entirely. He was collecting allies, building relationships, and slowly changing minds one person at a time. Let me tell you about the notebook. Peter kept a detailed journal of every casting director, every producer, every makeup artist he worked with. But this wasn't just a contact list, it was an intelligence file. He documented their attitudes toward Asian actors, their willingness to consider non-traditional casting, their personal interests and family backgrounds. By 1980, Peter had compiled what was essentially a roadmap of Hollywood's power structure and how to navigate it as an outsider. Here's a story that will amaze you. In 1982, Peter was working on Dynasty when he overheard a conversation that changed everything. Two executives were discussing a new action movie they were developing, something about an American truck driver who gets caught up in ancient Chinese mysticism. The working title was Big Trouble in Little China, and they were planning to cast all the mystical Asian characters with white actors in makeup. What would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, grateful for whatever small role they might throw your way? Peter did something extraordinary. He spent his own money he could barely afford, to hire a private investigator to research the filmmakers. He discovered that director John Carpenter had a secret passion for authentic martial arts films and had been frustrated by Hollywood's tendency toward cultural appropriation. Armed with this information, Peter didn't just audition for Big Trouble in Little China. He prepared what can only be described as a masterclass presentation. When he stepped onto the set of Big Trouble in Little China, he wasn't just playing Rain, one of the mystical three storms. He was embodying the power and complexity that Hollywood had refused to see in Asian actors for decades. But wait, there's more to this story that will absolutely shock you. The role of Rain wasn't originally written for Peter. In fact, it wasn't written for any specific actor. The character was described in the script as an otherworldly force of nature with no racial or physical description. John Carpenter was considering using special effects to create Rain entirely through computer graphics and voice work. Peter found out about this through his network of industry contacts. Remember that notebook I mentioned? He learned that Carpenter was meeting with special effects companies to discuss creating Rain as a completely digital character. This was 1985, remember, when CGI was still in its infancy. Most people would have seen this as an impossible situation. There was no role to audition for because there was no actor required. But Peter saw an opportunity. He spent 3 weeks preparing something unprecedented in Hollywood history, a live-action demonstration of how Rain could be portrayed by a real actor with practical effects and martial arts choreography. He rented a small theater space in Hollywood, hired a fog machine, and invited John Carpenter to what he called a conceptual audition. Picture this scene. John Carpenter walks into a dark theater, not knowing what to expect. Suddenly, fog begins rolling across the stage. Thunder sound effects boom through speakers, and from the mist emerges Peter Kwong, moving with supernatural grace, performing a martial arts routine he had choreographed specifically for this moment. For 5 minutes, he became Rain, not through computer graphics or movie magic, but through pure artistic interpretation. Carpenter was mesmerized. He later said it was the most compelling audition he'd ever witnessed, not just because of Peter's talent, but because of his conviction. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Carpenter was so inspired by Peter's performance that he completely rewrote the Three Storms characters to showcase their individual personalities and fighting styles instead of making them generic mystical villains. Behind the supernatural makeup and thunderous special effects was a man who understood that representation wasn't just about getting roles, it was about changing how an entire generation would see themselves on screen. During the filming of Big Trouble in Little China, something incredible happened that the media never reported. Peter discovered that several young Asian American actors had been hired as stunt doubles and background performers for the film. Instead of treating them as competition or ignoring them like many lead actors might, Peter did something remarkable. Every day during lunch breaks, he conducted what he called warrior workshops, informal acting classes where he shared everything he had learned about surviving and thriving in Hollywood as an Asian performer. One of those young actors was a 19-year-old named James Hong. Yes, the same James Hong who would go on to become one of the most prolific Asian American actors in Hollywood history. In a 2019 interview, Hong revealed that Peter's daily workshops during Big Trouble in Little China taught him more about the business of acting than 4 years of theater school. But here's where the story becomes both inspiring and heartbreaking. Are you ready for this? Between takes, Peter would mentor younger Asian actors, sharing not just acting techniques, but survival strategies for an industry that seemed designed to keep them invisible. He carried the weight of being one of the few, knowing that his failures might close doors for others, while his successes could crack them open just a little wider. The weight of representation. Can you imagine carrying that burden every single day? Peter later described it as walking on a tightrope while juggling torches, knowing that if you drop even one, it doesn't just burn you, it burns everyone who looks like you. Every role he took, every line he delivered, every interview he gave was scrutinized not just as Peter Kwong the actor, but as the representative of all Asian actors in America. Let me share a story that will show you just how heavy this burden was. It's 1987, 1 year after Big Trouble in Little China's release. Peter is at a Hollywood premiere, not for his own movie, but as a guest. He's standing in line at the bar when he overhears 2 studio executives talking about casting for a new action film. "We need someone who can do martial arts but also act," one says. "What about getting another one of those Thunder guys from that China movie?" The other executive laughs and responds, "They're all the same anyway. Just get whoever's cheapest." How would you have reacted to hearing that? Peter had 2 choices: cause a scene and potentially damage his reputation, or let it slide and perpetuate the problem. Instead, he chose a third option that was pure genius. Peter approached the executives, introduced himself politely, and said, "Gentlemen, I couldn't help but overhear you discussing martial arts actors. I happen to represent several incredibly talented performers who each bring unique skills and personalities to their craft. Would you be interested in meeting them? For the next 20 minutes, Peter essentially conducted an impromptu casting session right there at the bar, describing the specific strengths and characteristics of 5 different Asian actors. By the end of the conversation, both executives had exchanged business cards with him and scheduled formal meetings. 3 of the actors Peter recommended that night booked significant roles in major productions over the following year. This wasn't an isolated incident. Peter kept a notebook, and I've seen photos of it, filled with names and contact information of every Asian actor he met. When roles came up that he was either too old for or wasn't right for, he would personally call casting directors and recommend other actors. He essentially became an unofficial talent scout for his entire community. But here's where the story takes a turn that will absolutely break your heart. Can you imagine succeeding in your mission so well that the world no longer needs you? Peter's greatest battle wasn't against Hollywood's prejudices, it was against time itself. As the decades passed, as his hair turned gray and the leading man roles went to younger faces, Peter faced a heartbreaking reality. He had spent his entire career building bridges he might never fully cross. The phone calls came less frequently, the roles grew smaller. The industry he had helped change was moving on without properly acknowledging what he had sacrificed to get it there. By the early 2000s, something both wonderful and cruel was happening. Peter was watching actors like John Cho land leading roles in major comedies. He was seeing Daniel Day Kim become a series regular on Lost. He was witnessing Sandra Oh break barriers on Grey's Anatomy. Everything he had fought for was finally happening. But here's the heartbreaking irony. As representation improved, the industry began to forget about the pioneers who made it possible. Have you ever experienced success in something you worked toward for decades, only to watch the world move on as if the progress happened naturally? That's exactly what Peter faced. In 2010, at the age of 60, Peter was invited to speak at an Asian American film festival. The young moderator introduced him as a veteran character actor who appeared in Big Trouble in Little China. That was it. No mention of his groundbreaking work, his mentorship, his decades of fighting for authentic representation, just veteran character actor. During the Q&A session, a film student asked him, "What's it like being part of this new wave of Asian representation in Hollywood?" Peter paused for what felt like an eternity before responding, "I've been riding this wave for 40 years. I didn't just join it, I helped create it." The room went silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats, suddenly realizing they were in the presence of someone whose contributions they had never fully understood. In his final years, watching a new generation of Asian actors finally getting the opportunities he had fought for, Peter must have wondered if his decades of quiet persistence had been worth it. Would anyone remember the man behind the makeup? Would they understand that every Marvel movie featuring an Asian superhero, every blockbuster with authentic Asian representation, stood on foundations he had helped pour with his own blood, sweat, and dignity? Here's something that will give you chills and maybe bring tears to your eyes. In 2019, just 2 years before his death, Peter received a package at his home. Inside was a handwritten letter from Simu Liu, yes, the future Shang-Chi, along with a photo from a martial arts demonstration Liu had performed at a charity event. The letter read, "Mr. Kwong, you probably don't remember me, but you spoke at my acting class 15 years ago. You told us that our job was to be so undeniably talented that they'd have to build new boxes instead of trying to fit into their old ones. I've carried those words with me through every audition, every rejection, every small victory. I wanted you to know that whatever success I achieve, it's built on the foundation you created. The world may not always remember the pioneers, but we carry you with us in every performance." Peter kept that letter on his bedside table until the day he died. His niece found it there after he passed away, along with hundreds of similar letters from actors whose names you'd recognize, all thanking him for paving the way. As he lay down for the last time on May 27th, Peter Kwong was still fighting to be remembered not as a footnote, but as a pioneer. But here's what he couldn't have known in those final moments. His fight was far from over. When the news of Peter's passing broke, something absolutely beautiful happened. Social media exploded with tributes from actors he had mentored, directors he had inspired, and fans whose lives he had touched without ever knowing it. Simu Liu, Daniel Henney, John Cho, they all spoke of standing on Peter's shoulders, the roles they celebrated, the barriers they had broken, the authentic stories they were now telling. All of it traced back to a martial artist who refused to accept generic Asian bad guy number 3 as his ceiling. But the most powerful tribute came from an unexpected source that will give you goosebumps. 3 days after Peter's death, Marvel Studios made an announcement that shocked the entertainment industry. Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Studios, released a statement saying, "Peter Kwong didn't just act in movies, he rewrote the rules of who could be a hero on screen. Every Asian superhero we put in the Marvel Cinematic Universe stands on the shoulders of giants like Peter. We are dedicating our next Asian-led superhero project to his memory." Do you realize the magnitude of this? A man who spent most of his career fighting for small roles, for basic dignity, for the simple right to be seen as more than a stereotype, ultimately became the foundation for billion-dollar blockbusters featuring Asian heroes. The quiet revolution he started in the 1970s casting rooms culminated in Shang-Chi earning over $400 million worldwide. Peter's legacy isn't just rain-throwing lightning bolts in Big Trouble in Little China. It's every time an Asian actor walks into an audition and isn't automatically handed the villain role. It's every time a casting director sees talent instead of stereotype. It's the quiet revolution he led, one small role at a time, one dignified performance after another, until the industry had no choice but to evolve. He changed Hollywood not through grand gestures, but through 5 decades of simply refusing to disappear. Here's the question that's been haunting me since I started researching this story. How many Peter Kwongs are fighting similar battles right now in industries we don't even think about? How many quiet revolutionaries are breaking barriers so subtly that we don't notice until the change is complete? How many pioneers are building bridges they may never get to cross? And here's an even more important question for you. What barriers are you breaking in your own life? What quiet revolution are you leading that nobody sees yet but might change everything for the people who come after you? Peter Kwong's story ends, but his fight continues in every young actor of color still battling for authentic representation. Honor his memory by supporting diverse storytelling. Watch films that break stereotypes, champion actors who look like the world we actually live in, and remember that progress happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things consistently. Share Peter's story, because pioneers deserve to be remembered not as footnotes, but as the giants they truly were. The thunder may have stopped, but the storm Peter started is still changing everything.